Welcome to the Jumpstart Your Instructional Design Career podcast. This podcast is dedicated to helping new and aspiring instructional designers get the knowledge, skills, and confidence to stand out in the field and land their first corporate instructional design job. I'm your host, Jill Davidian, and think of this podcast as a way to put my over 20 years of corporate ID experience in your back pocket. I've helped over 500 new instructional designers successfully transition into the field, and I know what hiring managers are looking for. Whether you're looking for a career change and exploring if instructional design is right for you, or you know you want to become an ID and have no idea how to get started, you are in the right place. Join me each week for actionable guidance as we explore how to build your portfolio, transform your resume, and interview with confidence. Hi everyone, welcome back. In today's episode, I want to address something that's been a hot topic as of late, and that is the recent layoffs in corporate. As someone thinking about transitioning into instructional design in the corporate space, the recent news may be a bit scary, especially if you've never worked in corporate before in any position, and I completely understand. There's always that fear of the unknown doing something new, and I know that the recent news doesn't make it any better. Many of you are educators, and I know education is currently a field that has a shortage of workers and doesn't experience layoffs like corporate does, and that makes it even scarier. I get it. I would be in the same position if I was you. I would be scared not knowing what to expect. That's why I wanted to take some time to not only address what this means for those transitioning into instructional design and corporate as a whole, but also share my story going through the 2008-2009 recession, as well as other ups and downs throughout the years. So first, if you do research on the companies that are laying off right now and will be into 2023, it's mostly tech companies like Google. You don't see other industries laying off right now for the most part. Upon further research, many analysts are saying that the tech companies are laying off because they hired way too many people during COVID when everyone was at home using way more technology than usual and their business was exploding. Now it's getting back to normal levels and they're laying off a lot of the workers that they hired. Had they not hired all those extra people, we probably wouldn't be in this situation because it really is mostly tech companies. So that's the first thing I want to address. As an instructional designer, you can work in any industry. Yeah, there are instructional design jobs in tech, but there's also instructional design jobs in finance, banking, oil and gas, hospitality, healthcare, government, property management, customer service, sales. You get the point. These industries are not laying off for the most part. Now, I invite you to fact check that and, do your research via Google, but you'll see the same thing. Now, one thing that's important to understand about corporate is because there are so many industries that are influenced by a variety of different factors, it's not common for every industry to respond the same and do the same thing at any given time. So many times there could be one industry not doing great while others are doing amazing. For example, I was working as an instructional designer in the oil and gas field in 2015, 2016, when oil prices were crashing. And in Texas, where I live, oil companies are a big deal and make up a huge part of the workforce. It felt like a recession here, but no one else was experiencing it because it only affected oil and gas. I was a contractor for ConocoPhillips, which is a pretty large oil company, and at the time, most jobs were still on site in oil and gas. We had about 6 instructional designers in the department, all contractors except for the manager, around the time that oil started crashing and layoffs started happening. Several contractors in my department were let go, and the day finally came when it was my turn. After that happened, I wasted no time applying for new contracts. Now, I could have easily pivoted into another industry that wasn't crashing, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. There's plenty of work out there, and no one else was going through a downturn except for oil and gas here in Texas. But I wanted to stay in oil and gas because it paid really well, so I was determined to get another contract position in oil and gas despite the downturn. I ended up getting another contract with more money during the downturn at Marathon Oil. It was also on site. At that time, most jobs were on site. And soon the layoffs came there too, so the downturn caught up with them. I ended up seeing people get laid off left and right, but they were all full-time employees. None of them were instructional designers. Our instructional design department was still intact, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. So in May 2016, I decided I was going to quit before they had the chance to let me go. And at that point, I was done with going into an office and working on site. I decided I was never going to work on an office again. So that was my chance. Oil and gas was largely on site, but remote work was picking up, and there were lots of places hiring contractors remotely outside of oil and gas. So for many people in Texas, their world revolved around oil and gas. and for good reason. So say you're a petroleum engineer. That means you spent your entire career focused on oil and gas. You can't go work for Hilton as a petroleum engineer. You can't go work for a bank as a petroleum engineer. But with instructional design, we have so many options. Instructional design is a support service, meaning you can do it in any industry. It's like human resources, IT, finance. Every single company, no matter what they do, has those support services. Very different than a petroleum engineer or something that's very specific. So you can go work for a hotel chain, you can work for a cybersecurity company, a manufacturing company, property management, a call center. All of those companies need those support services. So when one industry isn't doing the greatest, we can pivot to another industry. And sometimes it's easy to get stuck and not see the forest from the trees and feel like everything is crashing down. But when this happened to me in 2016, all I had known was oil and gas since 2011. So for 5 years, that's the only industry I worked in because it paid really well and I didn't have to work anywhere else. But at that point, I said, it's time to pivot. And that's what I did. So that summer, in the midst of an economic downturn here in Texas that some felt was the end of their career, I took my then 8-year-old son as a single mom, and we traveled to 12 countries that summer for 2.5 months after I quit Marathon. When we came back, I ended up getting a couple of remote contracts, and the rest is history. I had said I was not going to go into an office anymore, and I used that downturn to spark a new direction and a new path that ultimately landed me where I am today. I am so thankful for taking the downturn in oil and gas and using it as an opportunity to take my career in a new direction and move forward. So all that to say, it's usually one or two industries that are having issues for various reasons. In 2020, it was hospitality, travel, restaurants, because no one was leaving their house. And in 2022, 2023, it's tech. One thing my business coach always says is that when there is a recession or an economic downturn, money doesn't just dissipate. It doesn't just evaporate into thin air and float into the sky and just disappear. It's still circulating in our economy. The money is still here. It just changes hands. It does become a little bit disproportionate with maybe a smaller group of people having it, but someone has it. It's our job to get on the right side of the equation. It's our jobs to use whatever situation we're in as an opportunity to change our situation and have it affect us for the better. So how can we be the ones receiving the money during a downturn instead of losing it? And so what I did in 2016 is I got out of oil and gas, which was a losing proposition, and I moved into other industries, which was a winning proposition at the time, but still in instructional design. Now, you may have read or heard somewhere that a recession is looming or that we're even in one, and that it's going to affect more than just tech in the future. Some say it is, some say it isn't. Some say the economy will slow and not crash. Some people think it's going to crash. Just to level set so we're all on the same page with where things are right now, in December 2022, unemployment was actually down at 3.5% despite the layoffs. 223,000 jobs were created in December 2022, and 4.5 million were created in 2022 overall. For reference, in February 2022, unemployment was around the same percentage as it is now, and then we hit a mini recession in March and April 2020 when the world shut down. Unemployment shot up to 14.7%, but then it started going down after that to where we are today. Now, going back to the recession in 2008, 2009, unemployment was 4.5% prior to the recession and shot up to 10% by October 2009. So before the recession in 2008, unemployment was actually higher than it is right now. The Federal Reserve predicts that the market will slow a bit to about a 0.5% growth, but we're not going to see a full-on recession. Who really knows? I don't have a crystal ball. You don't either. So I know that was a whole lot of number mumbo jumbo, but hopefully that gives you an idea of where we're at right now. It sounds really scary. It sounds like all these companies have been laying off people, but really and truly, it is tech and our unemployment rate is still pretty low. Now, if we go back to 2008, when we were going through a recession, and it was more than just one industry laying off people, that year I got a new job that came with a $12,000 raise and a $40,000 signing bonus. Now, instructional design does not offer signing bonuses anymore. This was in the early days, but that just goes to show that during a recession, that doesn't mean that everyone is not doing well. Again, money just changes hands. I kept that job until I quit in 2010 for another better job. There were no layoffs at the company I was working for the entire time I was there. In fact, I didn't even know a recession was going on. At that time, my son was very young. I had actually moved to Texas in 2008 and was really caught up with having a new baby and a new job and all those things. And I didn't even realize we were in a recession until we were out of one. I don't really remember exactly when the recession ended, but I know that the next job I got in 2011, I was making $30,000 more. When looking back on my 20-plus year career through the 2008-2009-ish recession, the oil and gas crisis, all the things that have happened over 20-plus years, there has only been 1 month where I have not had work, and it wasn't by choice. There have been times where I took a whole month off to travel, but there was 1 month throughout that entire time where I didn't have work, and it was not my choice. It was in 2013 when my job moved to London, where the rest of my team and my manager were. I was working for a London-based oil company at that time, BP, and I was the only one working in Houston. Now, they gave me a severance package, which also might be a new concept for many educators coming into corporate. A severance package can be anywhere from a couple weeks to several months of pay. So that means you are no longer working for the company, but they are paying you your salary as if you are. I believe they gave me about 6 months' pay, plus they paid out my accrued vacation and some other things. So I was good for a while. And that was my last full-time job working for someone else. I decided it was time to move to the contract side where I could better control my time, have more options, and make more money. So if you see the trend here, whenever something happens that may be considered negative, we're in a downturn, we're in a recession, that first time when I lost my job, which really had nothing to do with the recession, but it was still a pivotal moment, I decided I was never going to work full-time again, and I was going to go into contract work. The second time, I was already in contract work, but I was working on site, and I said I was never going to work in an office again, and I was only going to work remote so that I could really focus on my self-care. And both times were pivotal moments that I would not trade for anything. So another thing that I want you to consider is that when companies are laying off employees, they often keep contractors, at least in instructional design. The reason is that employees cost a lot of money. They're paying for benefits and they're paying for a lot of things that we don't see on the front end. Contractors are less expensive and more expendable, which sounds bad, but it's actually a benefit. Someone has to do the work. So if they're laying people off, they often have to change the way that they work. It's now done with less people, but a lot of times they still require training because they have to train the people that are now going to do the work to do more, possibly. Anytime change happens, good or bad, training is needed. So they often still need instructional designers. They'll hire contract instructional designers because it's less risk. I believe that's why I saw people being laid off left and right at Marathon during the oil crisis. But the ID contractors and other contractors were still there almost a year later. I was there for almost an entire year and never saw a contractor get laid off during the oil and gas downturn. Now, contract may not be what you ultimately want, but it pays the bills really well, I might add, if you have to do it when you're looking for a full-time job. Now, I know all this sounds scary. Corporate America itself is scary for many people, and adding talk of layoffs and recession and all that to the mix makes it even scarier. But as I said earlier, in an economic downturn, the money does not disappear. You can get on the right side of the equation and be the receiver of the money and not the loser in this situation. And I do believe you can do it in ID, as I have for the last 20 years. It's all about how you approach the situation. You can look at the worst possible scenario and think of every reason why you shouldn't do something like transition into instructional design, but you can also stay at a job that is slowly killing you, forcing you to live paycheck to paycheck, where you know the situation is bad. So would you rather stay in a situation that you know is bad and you're 100% sure that it's not working? Or would you rather take a chance where it's a 50-50 gamble at the worst? There's a reason why you're listening to this podcast. Something about your current career isn't working. I personally would take the chance. I am a bit of a risk taker, but that's how I've gotten where I am in my career. If I had played the safe route, I wouldn't be here. If I had been really upset and down about the layoffs or about losing my job or about the downturn in oil and gas or about all of these things, I wouldn't have been able to pivot and turn that situation around because I wouldn't have been able to see the forest from the trees, and I wouldn't be where I am today. When you have no risk, there's no reward. Now, you can take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, and if none of it resonates with you, that is perfectly fine. I know many of you have been in the field that you're currently in for many years, and it's really difficult to make a change, especially take a leap into the unknown, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But what I did want to do is share my perspective and my experience, and hopefully just give you something to think about. I would love to discuss with you in my Facebook group, and you can find that link in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in to the Jumpstart Your Instructional Design Career podcast. I hope you've gained valuable insights that will help you on your instructional design journey. Did you have a moment of clarity? Maybe you have some additional questions. Let's discuss in my Facebook group, which can be found in the description below and in the show notes at learningstrategyanddesign.com/podcast. If you love the show and want to hear more, follow the podcast and give me a rating and review. Let me know if there's a specific topic you'd like me to cover or a guest you'd like me to have on the show. You can also check out more resources for breaking into instructional design on my website, learningstrategyanddesign.com. Stay tuned next week as I bring you more tips, tools, and strategies to jumpstart your instructional design career.